Hi, hello. Thank you, everybody, for clicking on this Truthful Minister video or podcast. I'm not sure if you can see us or if you're listening on audio, but today I'm going to have my first guest on. Carson is one of my best friends. I've known him for about 4 years now. Carson is a former college athlete. Carson is currently a fiance, a son, a homie, basically a brother to me at this point. Yeah, so recently engaged as well. Yeah. Carson's just living a good life right now, and so Carson, why don't you tell everybody kind of your perspective on how did we first meet?
Okay, so I grew up my entire life playing soccer, and so it just made sense that whenever I went to college, I wanted to play soccer. So I went to, a college that's about 40 minutes away from where I, live, and, I knew the soccer coach there and everything, and so different meetings and all that with him. I told him, I'm going in, I'm going to be a religion major. He's like, oh, really? I was like, yeah. He said, well, we got a guy on the team who's also a religion major. I was like, no way. He goes, yeah, you'll probably like him. He's a cool guy, super outgoing, super energetic. His name is Jonny. I was like, okay, cool. I'm excited to meet him. And so, come preseason, my freshman year, I walk into the gym the first day, and, there's a kid, I think it was the women's coach's son or something like that, in the gym playing with, one of the older guys, one of the college guys. And I go up, I introduce myself, they're just kicking the ball around. I say, hey, my name's Carson. And he goes, hi, my name's Jonny. And so that was kind of how we initially, the actual first meeting in the gym. I think it was just me and you. I was there early for whatever reason.
Yeah, I want to say Aaron might have been there too.
Aaron may have been there. Yeah, Aaron's my homie since 6th grade. So the fact that he was going to the same college, I think we probably showed up at the same time.
Yeah.
Kind of as support.
So that's how we initially met. That was your freshman year of college, my junior year of college. I think we didn't get close till later that school year. It's always funny. I always think of, do you remember watching the Friday the 13th movie with me and Jonah? That was a time before we were even tight, but
no.
I think you
yes, I do.
Yeah. You just hopped in with us, because you were around Campus Ministries and you were one of my teammates, and I think we just mentioned we were going, and you were like, I'll go, and I was like, sure, why not? But we weren't even tight then. It's so weird to think about that. But kind of later that school year, I had gone through a weird time where me and one of my best friends had parted ways, and then my other best friend, Jonah, he stopped going to our school, because he started going online. Yeah. And so I just randomly had, nobody to hang out with. But kind of through that time, you and our friend Matthew, who hopefully will be on at some point, we started hanging out and doing a lot of nerd stuff and just got really tight. So, yeah, so that was, I think, early 2019 when we got tight. So it's been about 4 years.
Yeah.
So first question I want to ask you, man, now we've kind of talked about who you are and how we met. So you recently graduated college. You technically graduated in December of 2022, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so as a recent college graduate, if you could go back and give freshman Carson some advice, or even just generic advice to anyone who's a freshman in college now, or maybe they're going to be a freshman next year because I'm releasing this over the summer, what's some pro advice you go back and give yourself or any other freshman?
It's tough. The first, advice that comes to mind for advice to myself is just run. But no, on a more serious note, it's so tough because there's so much development from then to now. It's how do I fit just a good piece of advice without going into a major script,
Yeah. Without making this a 3-hour podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think to keep it short and simple is you'll get through it, whether that's relationships, whether that's, emotions, changes, school, whatever it is, you'll get through it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the encompassing advice.
That really does encompass everything well. I think the verse that I think of is I forget where it's at, but it's this too shall pass. This will come and go. That's a really good one. Because I think you nailed it when you said over 4 years, it's just so much happens.
It's insane.
I always tell people too that usually the first year of college you'll grow more than you've grown in the last 4 years of high school. It's just such an adjustment. So yeah, I think that's really good. Just it will pass. There's a lot of stuff. I know you and I both have a bunch of stuff that we can talk about or think about that we know we were hoping it would pass. So Next question, kind of the same. So, this is a Christian podcast, going to college. Where do you think your faith was at the beginning of your 4 years and versus where it is now? And how has your faith more specifically kind of changed or grown? What maybe challenged you in that way? And what's that adventure been like?
So coming into college, like I said, I knew I wanted to be a religion major. But it was for the purpose of either being a youth pastor or like head pastor or whatever. So that kind of changed as I went on. But so going into it, like I was in a good spot. But as Sean Thomas always preached, you got to own your faith. And you can't own your parents' faith. You can't own your grandparents' faith. And I think that's one thing that he nailed on the head, especially to incoming freshmen, is like,
for sure.
You grow up 18 years living under a household with, the people that you look up to or whatever. And a lot of times whenever you come to college, that's their faith. And so college is a lot about rediscovering who you are, figuring out what you believe. And so, like I said, coming into freshman year, I was owning my parents' faith. And so whenever he started preaching that, I really started to dig deep into what I believed. And, my, opinions changed, my beliefs changed a little bit. Still very core values from my parents. But, from there up until, I think junior year-ish, I was still wanting to be in a ministry role of some sort. And then I really started to fall in love with tech. And so that got me on a new path. And I think even the shift of, okay, I'm a religion major, but I'm not really going to go into, head ministry or anything like that. So what does this mean for me now? And so a lot of the religion classes that I took my freshman and sophomore year, Johnny can attest to this, I didn't show up to a lot at all. And so I think whenever that shift happened, it was like, okay, so this is just for my personal study, to dig deeper, to figure out who I am now. And so that really switched something in me, and I started showing up to a lot more classes, especially the religion classes. Shout out Coleman, the GOAT.
I'd love to have Coleman and Sean on here.
That'd be sick. But just the perspective shift really made me grow into, who I am, what I believe, now. And it's still changing. I'm still challenging a lot of beliefs. You challenge me a lot on what I believe, and I think that's something as Christians that we need to do and we should do.
I think perspective is huge. Again, talking about how much happens over 4 years, I think that's something that's very hard to understand when you're younger, is just, especially when you kind of turn 17, 18, you graduate high school and you start to kind of feel like, oh man, I've got this life thing figured out. But what you don't see is every 3 or 4 years, your perspective on life just totally changes. And so you look at people who are in their 30s, 40s, these new stages of life, and it's just a totally different perspective on everything. And so your perspective is constantly changing. And I like what you said too of it's healthy to keep changing your perspective or challenging it. Do you remember you kept saying dig deeper? Do you remember specifically when we did the kind of campus ministries meetings and things, my senior year, your sophomore year, we went to that prayer group and you had been talking about digging deeper, and one person who was praying for you, they said something about I could see you being an archaeologist, and you were like, what?
Dude, it was wild. So we go to this, is it just prayer house?
I think it's just a prayer house, the healing rooms.
Healing rooms
is what it's called.
That's what it is. So we go to this healing room place, and as the campus ministry interns, we go in there and we have all these people who are from this area just pray over us, and it's awesome. Very spiritual experience.
Wild.
And you hear stories of people in prayer and stuff like that. People praying over them. They're they prayed for exactly what I needed, even without saying it. And before it happens, you're cap. No way. That's cap. You told them at some point.
I definitely felt the environment as a whole was something I was very much so not used to. And so I was a little weirded out just in general already when we walked in.
But I go in there and I'm wanting to learn how to or not learn, but I'm wanting to dig deeper in my faith. And go in, and they asked, what are the 3 things you want to pray for? And I didn't even say that one. I forgot what the others, guidance, understanding, and something else. And this lady just pops off. And she's like, I can see you going to like Israel or Jerusalem or something, and like just digging around and digging like deeper and being an archaeologist of some sort. And I'm like, whoa, like
yeah, that was crazy. That's something I would encourage people to do, is like if you have a local healing room or prayer team or whatever, like that was the first just real experience I had, because for me, I was in a similar boat where I didn't want to come out and say like, hey, I haven't like been reading my Bible at all or just anything like that, because like I knew I wanted to be in ministry, and so I felt kind of convicted recently, and that was on my heart. But when I went in there and they're like, hey, can we pray for you? I was just like, oh, I think I just said something like, just stress, like I've got just a lot going on, responsibility. And the lady literally looked at me and was just like, I think you need to get some more alone time with God. And I was just like, okay. And then I'll tell this before we move on, just because this one's always wild too. Our friend Abby.
Yeah.
Our friend Abby, I had been friends with Abby for about a year. And we were really tight. We shared a lot of memories, and we had like shared some deep stories. I had no clue going into this. I've known Abby for a year that she's deaf in one ear. Never knew that. But she comes out and she's like, guys, like, who told them this? And Sean, our campus ministries director, was like, I didn't tell him anything about you guys. I just told him to pray. She was like, no way. And Sean's like, nah, I really didn't. And she said one of them literally was like, all right, God, can you just give Abby just an ear of listening? God, just one ear for listening. And she was like, how do they know? And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, I'm deaf in one ear. I was like, Abby, I didn't even know you were deaf in one ear. That was crazy. So that was a really wild experience. But that was a good high, and just talking about things that change and things you'll get through. Yeah. Our next question, getting a little more serious, is just, I know that while I was friends with you in college, you went through a pretty rough breakup. Yeah. So just tell us kind of like what that was like for you, and I gotta see how I wrote it down. How did you grow through that, and like how were you? What was that just time like for you in general? How did you get through it?
Yeah. So I started dating a girl while I was in high school. Went off to college. She was still in our hometown. And 2020 came along. We dated for about 2 years. 2020 came along. She dumped me. I'm not going to go into a bunch of details with that, but dude, that was the hardest break of my life, right? And it will always be the hardest break of my life, just because that's the closest I've been to wanting to marry someone without actually like doing it.
Yeah.
Knock on wood. But so yeah, dude, it was devastating, because I could see the rest of my life, my future was like being built with the idea of this girl by my side for the rest of my life, And so whenever, she dumped me, the whole future just crumbled. It was gone, And it crushed me. Like I can remember on Valentine's Day of 2020 is, seeing, all these people in love, all these posts and everything like that, and I just went through like the worst breakup ever. I was like, dang, like I'm gonna be alone forever. Like this, like sucks. This hurts.
Right.
And so, ended up making some bad decisions that night. Thankfully, I don't know what it was, but I think my mom called me right after. So I'll just say it, like I ended up just taking a handful of pills that night, down the hatch, and my mom called me. She was like, hey, you doing okay? And I broke down. I was like, and I told her, and her and my dad came and they picked me up. I was at work at the time, and that was like the lowest I've ever been in my life. It was terrible. Because as a kid, essentially at the time, like I didn't know how to control my emotions, and so like I just kept pushing them down. Like, no, I'm fine. Like, it's not that big a deal. And, like, it just bottled up. And finally, like, bottle of Coke. If you shake it long enough, that pressure just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds until, it just explodes. And it all came out that night. All of it. And I don't remember if that was the night that I called y'all and said to meet at the church. I don't think it was. I think that was a different night.
I think that was short. I can't remember if it was before or after.
I think it was before.
Okay.
Maybe.
I think it was before too.
I think. But anyway, just having people around you that know you well enough to say, hey, like, are you actually okay? Like, what's actually going on? I think that's huge, and having people that can, at 2 a.m., see a text or a call saying, hey, meet at the church, and they'll be there, waiting for you to get there. It's huge. But, that I think that was the biggest help in getting through it. Other than, and this is one thing that, like, I kept thinking of, like, how to say it whenever I was reading over these questions. Relationships change, girlfriends break up with you, parents, you move out, they're not always there. Friends mature, you grow apart, whatever. But the one, like, people change, but the one thing that won't is God,
Yeah.
And as cliche as it is, it's so important for people to know is, like, that, like, my faith at the time is what got me through it. Because I remember driving to the church that night, and even though I was in, like, the darkest mental state that I've ever been in, it was like, there's no point in throwing on, like, sad tunes and, like, having sad boy hours, right? It's like, nah. Like, if I'm in this spot, it's like, what better solution than to bump worship music, And so I remember the entire way here to the church, I was just jamming to worship music, and it was, I know the exact song because I played it on repeat.
Okay.
I played it on repeat. It's Osby Berry. What's the name of the song now? Not 10,000 Reasons.
If you remember it after, I'll just put it in post.
Yeah.
Put it on there.
We'll figure it out. But it is the most impactful song, or, like, that he's sang the most impactful way I've ever heard that song, and it was worth it.
It makes me think of, again, just another verse that comes to mind is just, again, it's cliche, but God says, like, if you build your house on the sand, when the rain comes, obviously everything, like the foundation of the sand, it's going to blow away and just get knocked down. But the man who builds his house on the stone, like the firm foundation.
Yeah.
And so, again, it does sound cliche, but it's the truth is just, it doesn't change. Like, everything else can change, everything else, the storms in your life, but you just have that to fall back on. I can't imagine how people do it without it, without God, without a relationship with Him, without a church family. And I think, too, like you said, just having the Christian community is just so important.
Exactly.
Just having, like you said, the Coke bottle, if nothing comes out, it just builds up and builds up. That's another reason that I wanted to do this podcast in general, is just because I've been blessed with so many wonderful people, and I'm just like, I think about just people talk about the gifts you've been given and how you're supposed to use them, and I was just like, well, I think one of my greatest gifts is just God has blessed me with awesome people, and so I was like, I need more people on this couch, and I can just share the gifts that God has given me of friendship with the world. So that was cool, and I think moms just know. That was cool. Your mom called me. I've had those moments too. Hopefully we all have, like, just your mom just knows sometimes. I know Bryson, at some point I'll have Bryson on here. Bryson, were you there for his story at Stories at KW?
I don't think I was.
He had a similar moment where he was like, he said he was on his bed and just was like in his feels and was just having a rough night, and he said his mom just walked in and was like, you good? And he was just like, no, and just went. So moms just know, man. That's awesome. So to anyone out there going through a breakup, or maybe who's someone who's still hurt from a past relationship, like, even if they've gotten through it, but I don't know what that's like. I'm not a relationship expert, but if they're like maybe scared to date, or if it just feels like that past relationship is still weighing them down, or just maybe they're worried about being single in general, what would you say to encourage people like that, like going through a breakup or maybe worried about singleness or maybe a hurt relationship in the past?
Yeah. So the two things that is like my big advice, right? One of them is a piece of scripture. I can't remember if it's Romans 4:18 or 4:16, but the first part of it is, it's talking about Abraham and how he was so old, wasn't able, no chance of having sons at that point, really, right? But it says, even when there was no reason for hope, he kept hoping. And so it's like, dude, that piece of scripture alone, like, is just phenomenal. It's like, don't give up hope at all. I know you mentioned hope earlier, and it's just keep going. And the other piece of advice, and I can't remember where I saw this, who told me this or not, but it was meant to be. It just wasn't meant to be forever.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's heat.
Yeah.
That's heat.
And so, I feel like a lot of people have that perspective of, oh, well, it just wasn't meant to be, and that's how I was. And it was like, well, dang, that's 2 years just down the drain. Yeah. 2 years that I could have been, with my actual future wife, or 2 years that I could have spent with family or friends or doing something like it, and it's like, no, it was meant to be. God opened that door for you. You were there for a reason.
Right.
And I, now looking back on that, like, definitely there for a reason. A lot of growth came out of that breakup. God opens doors and he closes doors.
Yeah, that's another Romans verse. It's somewhere in Romans 8 where it says he's working through all things for good.
Yeah. And
then, of course, you took what the enemy meant for evil and you turned it for good. That's I want to say that's Genesis 49 or something like that, or what's one of the last couple chapters of Genesis. But I mean, both of those, you're right. Like, I think that's another just instance of how God moves through all things, and there's a time and place for everything. We've had people move in and out of our lives. Yeah. We've lost friends, but we've had friends come back. But it's just, that's part of life. It's just God has intention. I love that, actually. Meant to be, but it wasn't meant to be forever. That's so perfect. And so, our bodies weren't meant to be forever. So exactly. Everything, to a degree, is temporary. I think that sometimes we just get too attached to different things, and we understand that God says, hey, like, I know you enjoy that now, but at some point, like, it's going to go, or at some point it's going to come back. So, again, the foundation on the rock, that's never going to go. Yeah. That's really cool how everything's tying back together. God's good, man. This is going so smooth.
I know, man.
So, also played soccer for 5 years. We talked about being a college athlete, and on top of that, you were a campus ministries intern. You had a job through most of it. I've always known you as a working man. Even if you didn't have an actual job, you'd be like, dude, my dad's got me doing yard work all day. Yeah. So always been a working man. And so for anyone else in college who's like playing a sport, what's the secret, bro? Like, that seems like a pretty busy schedule, but you also managed to have time for the homies. You also managed to have time for romantic relationships. So being just busy in college with jobs, soccer, family, the homies want to hang out. You have a girlfriend. Like, how does that work? What would your advice be?
Yeah, just priorities. Going to college, I was walk-on for soccer, so I didn't get any scholarship. I made sure that coach knew my main priority going into college was A, school, and B, campus ministries. Yep. Those were my two main priorities, and luckily I had a coach who understood. That's fine. So it's finding your priorities. You're not going to be able to make it to every single thing. I missed a lot of practices because I had stuff to do for campus ministries. I had stuff. I had a homework, stuff like that. And so yeah, just priorities and time management is the biggest thing. I know freshman year, there was a few guys on the team who kind of got annoyed that I just didn't show up to things at times. And, I don't think they necessarily knew that I was involved with so much at the time, because my freshman year I stayed pretty much to myself. I didn't, do a lot with the soccer team outside of practice or games. But yeah, they kind of came at me at one point. And I was like, look, coach knows, like, it's all taken care of. It's we're chilling. So yeah, just figuring out what your top priority is, and then everything else will fall in after that.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it too with just the idea of communication,
Yeah.
like going to coach and saying like, hey, I love the sport, but obviously I'm not getting paid to be here anyway, and so here's these other aspects of my life that I find really important. I might have to sacrifice soccer sometimes, and that's just how it is. And I think you would be surprised if you're out there and you're stressing about this. Like, most people are nice people. Like, I'm not saying that it's always going to be perfect, but our coach was nice enough to just be like, because he did the same thing for me, basically. I was also a walk-on, and so I was just like, hey, like, especially my junior year, when I got my first big job and I had all this other stuff going on, I was just like, I'm not going to be able to make it to spring season. Yeah. And he was just like, all right, man, make it when you can. And I was like, dope. And so I think, too, like, talking about friends or girlfriends and things, it's just important to be honest with that as well. Yeah. Because obviously there were times when Carson's like, oh, I can't, guys. Like, I've got to do this. And it would be like, come on. But, like, obviously it stinks, but, I mean, here we are years later. We still hang out. It wasn't just like, oh, you can't make it. Like, you're gone. Like, if those are your friends, if you can't make it one time because something comes up, like, they weren't great friends in the first place. But I think that a lot of people, I know I've heard this, like, people talk to me about being busy or situations, and they say, like, oh, well, I'm just so stressed about all this. And I'm like, well, have you asked your coach if you could miss the press? Like, have you asked your friends if you could miss this? Have you asked your boss to, like, reschedule you? Yeah. And they'll say things like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, they probably wouldn't. It's like, probably. It's like, that you at least try. Like, what's the worst thing they say is no? So I think a good part of that is just communication and being willing to try those things. And in my life, for priorities, again, my junior year, I was so busy. I did the same thing where I just had to analyze, like, what is my priority? And so I went to what I could, and I think it's also important to just find rest. Like, to just take days where you're just like, I don't care how many people need me. Like, I have to just take today to sit at home and do nothing, or whatever your version of relaxing is. Yeah. So those would be my two pieces of advice, too. Like, yeah, that hits. So I want to talk a bit about our experience on the soccer team, continuing to talk about sports. So think about being in the locker room with some of the guys before the game. I think other than me and you, there was only one real person that I know was Christian. It would be Zach. There were a couple other people who were like good people, maybe they were Christian, but they didn't really go to church. Probably wasn't a priority. So, so just being in a college athletic locker room experience, like, what's that like for you as a Christian? Like, is it weird? Is it hard? It is. What is it like?
It's tough.
Yeah.
It is so tough.
It's tough,
especially whenever it's not like, it's not like everybody on the team was. God, man, I'm knocking everything over here. It's not like everybody on the team was from the Bible Belt and were, Christians, we had people from all over the world on our team. And so, and if you're listening to this and you're from the Bible Belt and you've never really left the Bible Belt, believe me, people outside of the Bible Belt are very upfront of, no, I'm not Christian.
Yeah.
No.
And just to clarify, too, like, when you're saying all over the world, like, we mean that. We had so many international players.
Oh, yeah.
Scotland, Ireland, Spain, Mexico. I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
I can't even name them all.
Yeah.
A couple guys from London.
Yeah. We had a guy from Germany, later on, Sweden, Norway, like, all over. Yeah. All over. But, there was a couple guys on there that were just like, anytime we would try to bring our faith into practice, into games, into anything, it's like, that's so stupid. No. Like, why would I pray after a game? Why would I pray before a game? Like, we just got absolutely demolished 10-0. And you're wanting to pray with the team that
I was
going
to bring that up, was us trying to pray after games.
Yeah. It's like, some people just don't, I guess, understand from an outside perspective what Christianity means to us.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult trying to minister to them. Because if they've not grown up around Christianity, it's just such a foreign, idea.
For sure.
And way of living. So it was very, very difficult at times, but also very rewarding as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know you have a couple things in there about praying after games and, you know, Bible studies and stuff like that. And so I'm going to kind of like skip into that a little bit here. Yeah. So the women's coach sat next to my parents at graduation. And they ended up chit-chatting and everything. And he said, my favorite memory about Carson is, you know, we had that Bible study going, the men's team Bible study. Mm-hmm. Jamie was leading it. And every week he would encourage us to try to invite someone and get someone else in there. And so every single week I'd go talk to Coach. And I'd say, hey, Coach, we got the Bible study this week. If you want to come in.
I remember that.
You know, I'll try to make it. I'll see what I can do. And he never showed up. Up until the very last one.
Yeah.
I walked into the room and he was sitting in the back of the room. And he was there for one.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, it can be so difficult hearing, I'll try to, and then seeing nothing. I might. You know, or just straight up no. It's like, no, I'm not going to be there. And then you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally there's a breakthrough. You know, whether Coach, you know, got anything out of that Bible study or not, it's neither here nor there. Mm-hmm. But
you did your part.
Exactly. You know, it's so difficult but so rewarding.
I think it's just a lot about like sowing seeds too. Like even if you feel like, you know, they're not receptive or people think it's just so foreign, it's like you can have a conscious heart and never look back and say like, oh, I wish I had said more or anything like that. It's just like you're sowing seeds, and whether or not they fall on concrete or whether or not thorns come up and grab them, it's just that's kind of not for us to worry about. Yep. It's just important for us to be showing people Jesus. And then another note too is, again, I think another thing that's tied back to something we've already said is just that issue of perspective. Talking about the Bible Belt now, it's like that was very different for me. We went to, I would say, a pretty diverse college.
Yeah.
Like growing up here in this small town, everybody's from the Bible Belt, and so even people who didn't necessarily do the right thing or act like Christians, like they probably say they were Christians. Like 90% of people at my school were white. I think 95% of people at my school were straight. And so get to college and it's just everything. It's just a total mix. And so that was another kind of wake up of like, you know, you're 18, you're graduating high school, and you think, man, I kind of figured it all out. Like, I did it. I know everything. I've maybe you've got a job, maybe you've got a girlfriend. You're just like, oh, man, everything makes sense. And then you get to college, and you're like, oh, it's a whole new world out there.
Yeah.
And then you get to graduate college, and now you're like, oh, shoot, now it's another whole world. And so you're just constantly going through that perspective change. But that was just good to point out, like being a college athlete, it is a different world. Especially for me, I didn't play sports in high school or anything. Walked onto the soccer team. Now I'm in a totally different world. Yeah. I think, too, being a college athlete, the only other thing I would touch on is just, like, it can just be uncomfortable sometimes, like, the temptation and things just in the locker room. Just the amount of times the guys would be just saying stuff, and you're kind of like, I don't do it. Like, I don't want to.
I remember getting absolutely clowned on after the game where I prayed, which I deserved to be clowned on. I deserve to be clowned on for that one.
I wasn't going to bring anything up.
I think it's so funny now.
It wasn't even that big of a deal. So
no, Carson, it wasn't.
So when we were trying to pray for games, or pray after games with like the other team, one time we go out there, and was it the very first time? Or like the second time?
It was the second or third.
I think it was the second or third time we had prayed with the other team. The goal was like, you know, both teams get to the center of the field, and somebody prays, and so we get to the center of the field. And I guess I normally done it, but one time I was like, Carson, we doing it? He's like, yeah. And so, because Carson and I again are like leading the idea of doing this in the first place. So it's kind of our thing. I go get the other team, circle up, and I was just like, all right, Carson, let's pray. Carson, you got it? We all put our heads down, and Carson goes.
I panicked so hard. So I am not gifted with, like, prayer. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not one of those guys that can just, you know, say, hey, can you pray? And then just spit out the most eloquent, like, just well-worded prayer. And so I was just like, hey, God, thanks for this day. Thanks for the game.
Something about traveling, I want to say. Maybe you said, like, give them safe travels.
Yeah, safe travels. And then I just paused because I didn't know what else to say. And it was just the longest pause. It felt like ages for me. And I was just like, amen.
Yeah. And we just kind of got up and walked away. It's probably like 3 seconds. But either way, it was noticeable. It was noticeable for sure.
Forever.
I'm not even the most equipped prayer either, because I don't really pray for our church on Sunday mornings, and I feel like I always say the same thing. I think it just caught you so off guard.
Oh, it did. It did.
I really should have said something.
I did not expect it at all.
I really just threw you in there. I was like, all right, Carson, you're praying. So to wrap up, last thing I'm going to ask kind of every guest is just, it's the Truthful Ministry podcast, and so on episode 0, which I haven't filmed yet, but they'll have hopefully seen before this.
Solid.
But on episode 0, I talk about how Truthful Ministry is just, again, about being open and honest and truthful with ourselves, whether it's a good story or a bad story, but also sometimes the truth can be hard to hear, and sometimes the truth can be convicting. And so I think that there's a lot of lies that the enemy spreads, and there's just different cultural things that maybe aren't biblically true, that aren't the rock that we're supposed to build our foundation on. So just what's one thing in your mind that, whether it's prevalent to you or just something you see in the world, that you feel like the enemy is kind of spreading this lie, something that's accepted, or an idea that everybody should follow, that you just think that you want to speak truth against, and just say, like, this is something I think everybody is maybe focusing on wrong, just some sort of lie the enemy says that you want to preach against, preach some truth into.
Yeah. So currently, while we're recording this, it's Men's Mental Health Month, and that's something that has been super, prevalent in my life, especially. It's just mental health. And so I think something that's kind of extremely important but isn't getting the light of day is just, not just men's, but mental health in general, there's so much evil and darkness in this world, and it can get to you, going back to the Coke bottle analogy there, if you just bottle that up and everything, at some point it's going to come out and it's going to get messy, so just be open, rely on God for guidance and in your troubles and everything, and rely on friends and family, people that you trust and love, to really help get you through that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a phrase, and you can tell me if it's terrible or if you don't like it or something, but I've heard the phrase of, it's okay to not be okay.
Oh, absolutely.
I think a lot of times people just sort of, especially sometimes Christians, depending on what church you go to, some Christians, some churches out there, sadly, are like, what, you're depressed? You should be happy because Jesus. It's like, no, man, I'm just sad. And so, yeah, I think that's totally okay. That's a good one.
Yeah, it is definitely okay to not be okay. There's been plenty of times where, I've just absolutely broke down in front of friends and family. And it is probably one of the most relieving experiences.
Yeah.
To just be able to let your emotions go.
So. Yeah. So I'd just say to anyone out there going through something, or if it's been hitting, just don't be afraid to shout out to somebody. Find somebody you trust, and just tell them what's going on, and just see if they can pray for you, or even, I promise, just getting it out sometimes can be half the battle. Just saying hey, here's everything I'm going through, just crying in front of somebody. It's okay, now that I got it out of my system. So yeah, that was really good. Before we officially end, I think you told me that you had something you wanted to ask me.
Yeah. So going back to the student athlete or aspect, the Christian athlete aspect, if you could go back and possibly change one thing about your ministry as a Christian athlete, what would you change anything, and what would you change?
So if I had changed one thing, the first couple immediate things come to my mind are, I wish I had been more intentional about inviting people to church specifically, because it's one thing to do Bible studies and stuff, but I think getting someone into a church, especially because a lot of those guys don't go, and just having them see hey, church doesn't have to just be boring, and there are other, it's just an hour, we hang out, we get food after or something. So to be honest, the first thing that comes to my mind, we're just going to be very truthful on this podcast, is just, I don't know, obviously nobody's perfect, but as a goalkeeper especially, everybody has their moments in scoring, but there were definitely some times where I said some non-Christian words, man. And I know that as the Christian on the team, it's if other people are out there doing whatever, the people who aren't Christians, they're saying whatever and nobody even pays attention because it's just normal for that person.
Yeah.
But when the Christian randomly misses a save and I jump up and say something too quick that I shouldn't have, it's everybody takes note. Laser pointer eyes straight to me. Coach always Coach always would mention this. This is very truthful ministry right here. Coach always mentions, he would always mention the joke of Johnny doing ab day. He'd be like, Johnny, don't do what you did on ab day again or something, because we were doing abs one time, and I just said something I shouldn't have, because I was dying, bro. We had just run so much in the aux gym, and then we're expected to go sit down after running and do a workout, and so I get to abs, and I'm like, I'm dying, bro. And we have to do it because we're getting watched by coach and stuff, and so some guy does the thing where like you lay down and you put your legs up, and they kind of throw your legs, and you got to push them back up. And I think he threw my legs one time, and I just said something I really shouldn't have. And coach happened to walk by, and again, it's like I'm the Christian, so if it had been any other player on the team, he wouldn't even remember that.
Yeah.
But Johnny said it, and so he was like, Johnny, what did you just say? And I was like, oh man, So if I could go back, I would just be more intentional. I just think intentionality in general.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I hope to people who are listening to this with everything we've said, it's like, I don't think you realize the importance of you being the Christian on the team.
Yeah.
It's like looking back, I'm like, oh, I was the Christian. Carson was the Christian. It's like we should have, I don't know, maybe just taken that more seriously. Because at the time you're just like, oh, I'm the Christian on the team, no big deal. I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense to somebody, but I think I would have just been more intentional overall with a lot of different stuff I did.
Fair enough.
Intentionality would have been big. So I guess that's going to be it. Hopefully everything went smooth. Hopefully you're hearing this. Hopefully there's a video. Hopefully there's no issues. But at some point, I want to be able to do questions from you all. So if you have anything that you want us to talk about, next time Carson's on here, maybe if you want to leave some comments, and I'll make sure to ask them to him that time. Or just talk about in general, even if it's not Carson, just different things you want to hear from. Because I've got a lot of different awesome friends that God has blessed me with again. And so somebody in my life will be able to answer your question, I promise. Like I said, I want to get our campus ministries director on here maybe.
Yeah.
Our pastor. I'd love to get Emily, your fiance, on here at some point.
Yeah,
our friend
dope.
Matt. I've got a lot of good people, man. So I have the resources. If you have a question, please let me know. Let us know any prayer requests as well. But I think that's going to do it for us. Hope you have a blessed day. See ya.